Episode 2. Farewell. Lana had lost track of time. As soon as she woke up, she opened the window and froze, staring into the distance, silent and withdrawn. Her cheeks were dry. She hadn't shed a single tear. Her long fingers closed around the rough body of a doll that her sister had kissed before she left forever. She picked it up slowly, as if it weighed several pounds, and looked into its face devoid of any features. Lotta's eyes fell on her wrist, which got exposed when she bent her arm at the elbow. Her birthmark, which used to be almost perfectly round, had changed. The line had broken, lost its shape, and it looked as if it had been erased, smudged on the edges. Lana ran her hand over it nervously, as if hoping to fully erase it, but the circle didn't budge. If she had any energy for it, she would have definitely thought about it, but she didn't. She didn't care about anything. She clutched the doll, tightening her fingers, and looked out the window again. Her mother was busy around the house, covering the polished metal plates with towels. Their faces were reflected in them, so the spirits could be reflected too. They had to be covered to prevent Vereya's ghost from entering and getting stuck in the mirrors. Their mother didn't cry either. She didn't have time. She had to think about all the necessary details of the ritual, worrying about forgetting something. She needed to send her daughter off in a manner she deserved. Their father looked like a ghost himself, silently wandering from the bedrooms to the hall, from the hall to the barn, from the barn to the ice house where the food was stored. He was constantly doing something, but then he would realize he was doing the wrong thing, leave the job half done and come back, having remembered something else that had to be done more urgently. Then the whole thing would be repeated again, so he would go to the bathhouse just to rush out of it to go back to the house. Hannah behaved as usual. She didn't realize that her family was at a turning point, that her sister had died, taking away their peace of mind and any chance of absolute happiness. Lotta went downstairs to help with the funeral arrangements. Hmm. Hmm. Go with modesty on this one. Vereya's body had already been laid in the casket. Leda caught her mother combing her locks. She moved the comb very carefully, as if she was afraid to wake her daughter up. Then she put it in the casket next to the other things that Vereya would need in the afterlife. Lotta, you're here. You're up, finally. There's still so much to do. Mother spoke quickly, but lifelessly, as if out of habit, devoid of any emotion. It's like she doesn't realize that Vereya is dead. Stay with her. I'll be right back. She walked away. Leda looked at her. Her mind was empty. All thoughts and emotions had been sucked out of her along with any air. Now her lungs ached, begging her to take a breath, but she refused to breathe next to her lifeless sister. She went to the covered mirror and stared at it for a while. Her mind was numb with pain, and she didn't understand why. Why did Mother do this? Doesn't she want Vereya to stay with us? She reached out and ripped off the piece of cloth. It dropped at her feet. In the dull reflection of the metal, she saw her face distorted with grief, fresh, young, and healthy. Why? What did you do to deserve this? There was a rustle behind her, which made her flinch and turn around. She Vereya lay with her eyes closed, her arms were motionless, extended straight along her sides. Just nervous. I must have imagined it. But she kept on listening to the fragile silence. Nothing happened, but she grew more and more tense. She hunched over, spontaneously hiding behind her raised shoulders. Her fingers trembled, her trying to clench into a fist. She heard the door slam in the attic, where her and her sister's room was. She hastily picked up the cloth and covered the mirror again. Her heart was thumping in her chest and ears, and her hands were shaking, hastily trying to fix the fabric on the frame. Leaning her forehead against the mirror, Leda closed her eyes. I need to calm down. She straightened up and sighed, feeling that she'd managed to pull herself together. She was about to call her mother, but froze when she noticed the scarf Dragon had given Vereya. Vereya said she'd never take it off. Now she's dead, and the scarf sits unwanted on a bench. What should I do? Tie it around her neck. Lada picked up the scarf, held it tight for a moment, memorizing how it felt, and then approached her sister. Trying not to touch the body, she wrapped it around her neck and immediately moved away. There was a rustle again, louder now. She could swear she'd seen the casket shudder. Are you ready? It's time. Her mother left the room, holding Hannah's hand so that she wouldn't leave her to make dolls again. Leda wiped her hand across her forehead, brushing away her worry, and replied calmly, Let's go. Her mother flinched when she saw the scarf on Vereya. I thought she'd like to take it with her. Yes, it's good of you. The door creaked as it opened. Dragan's tall, tense figure stepped inside. With his arrival, the already painful tension became unbearable. Grief had become flesh and blood, gained consciousness, and gave birth to reality and pupils darkened by sadness. By then, everyone on the outskirts of the village knew that Vereya was dead, which meant it was an inescapable truth. Lada wanted him to leave and never come back. She couldn't help looking for the signs of particular grief on his face, something which screamed about how close he and Vereya had been. She couldn't help remembering Vereya's laughing face, knowing that neither he nor she would laugh like that again. She felt disgusting, shameful envy and fear that Vereya wanted to see only him, and he only preferred for Lada to be in her place. Their eyes met, but she immediately turned away. Her father pointed to the casket as if Dragan couldn't see it and said in a trembling voice, There. She is. Her father stood on one side of the casket, Dragan on the other. Ready. Heave! They picked up the wooden box Vereya would sleep in forever and slowly headed for the door. At the door, Dragan noticed the scarf around her neck and stumbled, almost dropping the casket. Careful! Again, Leda and Dragan looked at each other, just to immediately look away. He is grateful for what you did. Most of the village had gathered at the house, ready to see Vereya off on her last journey. The elder and the high priestess waited with silent sympathy until all the family members came out. The men put the casket on the sled. One of the priests lifted the poles of the sled. We can go. Various parents and sisters stood on either side of the sled, and the elder and the priest led the procession. Everyone else walked behind. Everyone was holding torches. The flames flickered due to the occasional movements and gusts of wind. The sled's runners dragged over the ground, leaving behind deep tracks. The procession moved slowly along the winding path as the bowed heads carried unspoken fears. Distant sounds of drums called for those who had already crossed the threshold between the worlds to join the procession. Lada looked down at her feet. Her thoughts were far away as she was struggling to grasp and process them. She raised her head. The forest was getting closer, and soon they would see wooden roofs. The sled hit every slightest bump, Vereya's casket heavy as the grief of her parents rattled and tilted. The hands peeking out from underneath the sleeves of the priest who was dragging the sled were old, but he showed no sign of fatigue. He walked slowly, but at a steady pace, without stopping. Lada sneaked a wary peek at the other priest. He was also walking ahead, and as their leader and protector, but he felt somehow threatening. People avoided him across the street when they saw him coming, but at the same time they greatly respected him and were grateful to him. He was the village's shield, the guardian, the executioner. Don't turn around. Don't look at me. She squared her shoulders and took a deep breath in. The dampness of the forest was hovering in the air. Rotten leaves resembled a carpet and sank unpleasantly under her feet. It smelled of mushrooms and soaked wood. The somber peace was an illusion, and everyone knew it. Their already quiet voices fell silent, their steps slowed. The young priest became more wary, more careful. What was hidden under his mask? What sort of expression did he have on his face when he was alone? Was there anyone in his life who wasn't afraid of him? Lada asked herself those questions so as not to think about anything else. And it worked. Her heart was no longer bleeding. Her breathing calmed, only her senses sharpened, but that happened every time she got into the forest. Lada narrowed her eyes at her smiling sister. Hannah drew her neck to her shoulders and covered her mouth with her hand, giggling softly. She did that sometimes. Always for no reason, but right at that moment it seemed not only inappropriate, but even cruel. Lada whispered, "Stop it." Gently get through to her. Lada put her arm around her sister's shoulders and tried to distract her. "Do you think we'll meet Leshy? He doesn't like people making noise in his forest." I mean, I guess that was subtle. I don't know who Leshy is. Hut Cemetery. Finally, rows of huts appeared between the trees, towering on stilts. The wooden houses were overgrown with moss and lichen. They swayed and cracked, waiting for new owners from the other side. The winds shrieked through the holes in the roofs, carrying the smell of earth and dead flesh. The priest lowered the funeral sled, and the men helped to lift the casket. They set it down in front of one of the huts. The door, soon to be boarded up, was open invitingly. Vereya's parents approached her silently to the sound of relentless drums. Lada stood like a taut string, pressing her hands to her stomach, and watched her father and mother kiss Vereya goodbye. "You're not crying." Lada looked warily at the High Priestess, not even trying to pretend that she was glad to be in her company. "Were you expecting me to?" "Blood doesn't always pour out. Sometimes it overflows inside us. That is far worse." "What does it matter where the blood flows if the pain is the same?" The priestess smiled sadly, and condescendingly her blind eye stared at Leda without blinking. "People are made of pain. Our souls are molded out of suffering. Like rag dolls, each piece of cloth is stitched to another, and loose threads stick out like scars. You're scared, hurt, I know. But I also know that this pain will make you the person you're destined to become someday. Don't grieve for your sister." The priestess outstretched a long, thin finger and pointed to one of the distant huts. almost hidden behind tufts of moss. My sister's buried in that one, so I know what it's like. So she understands me. The priestess touched her shoulder, smiled again, this time reassuringly, and approached Vereya. Her parents had already stepped aside so that the others could say their farewells. The priestess beckoned to Sienna, her granddaughter. She helped take care of Hannah and was always quiet and meek. Standing next to the casket, Sienna trembled like a leaf in the wind. It was always scary to look at death firsthand, especially if it was the first time. Leda looked around for the priestess of their grandson, Ozar. He was standing on the side, frowning and lost in thought. He didn't approach Vereya, but stared at the casket as if trying to figure out what had happened to her. Leda had been asking herself that question over and over again. Who or what killed her? Evil spirits coming from the fog, one of the villagers, maybe it was a stranger from the forest. Tata approached the casket next. She was trying to hold back her tears, but her trembling chin betrayed her emotions. She looked at Vereya as if she had lost the last person she loved. There was horror, rage, and deep sorrow in her eyes, but her pride wouldn't let her cry. She was holding back that hurt her even more. Eventually, unwelcome tears rolled down her cheeks, but she quickly wiped them off with a handkerchief. Then, folding the cloth in half, she put it in the casket so as not to take away with her the longing for a friend. She squeezed the wooden edges, not daring to leave. Dragan came up to her and gently clasped her shoulders, brought her back to her senses, which had been lost in her agony. Ada shuddered and moved away hastily. I'm leaving. Dragan looked at Vereya, frozen, forever young and beautiful. He closed his eyes. Then he opened them again and looked at Vereya's haggard face. His lips parted. He spoke so softly that only the deceased could hear him. I'm sorry. He didn't do anything else. He then walked away from Vereya without turning around. As usual, he was going to keep his pain and regret locked up inside. Lada went to the casket and took her sister's hand despite the protest bubbling inside of her. Her fingers were cold, hard, and like a block of ice. You will be far away, beyond the river of fire. Hope the crossing won't be as difficult as they say. Lada put Vereya's doll next to her. It will protect your sleep, as it always did. Lada squeezed her sister's hand for the last time and wanted to move away, but then saw the birthmark on her wrist, changed and incomplete, like her own. Lada backed away, almost stumbling, but somehow managed to stay on her feet. She pressed her back against the trunk of the tree, and feeling her chest heaving, her thoughts began to race. What's going on? This can't be coincidence. This must be the devil's work. Bad omens, so many of them. Should I tell my parents? Lada found her mother's face in the crowd and immediately gave up on the idea. Her parents were trying to hold on, but they were only a few steps away from the abyss of despair. No, I shouldn't upset them further. Oh, Vereya, I relied on you too much. What am I gonna do now? The drum stopped abruptly and the casket creaked as it was lifted back into the air. Her heart hammered in her ears, replacing the rhythm of the drums. After carefully climbing the stairs, the casket was slid into the hut and the door boarded up. A house with no windows, no doors. That's where Vereya would live now. The musician's hand hit the stretched leather with renewed vigor. The funeral was over. The tops of the coniferous trees, born many centuries earlier, hadn't seen the earth for a long time. They reached for the sky, the stars, and the lonely moon. They infinitely tall trunks made the human soul feel small, insignificant next to them. The forest still remembered the gods and how life was before their death. The whole world was cursed, and only on the outskirts there was still a glimmer of hope. Letta tripped over a root. Her legs were shaking. Every time she looked up at the tips of the branches that were lost in the sky, she felt dizzy. Can birthmarks change? I could have scratched it without realizing, but Vereya has changed too. What does this all mean? Who can I ask without causing trouble? What if they think I'm cursed? She stumbled again, this time unable to contain a strangled cry. She heard the voice of the young priest. Breathe. His voice sounded muffled at times because of the bull mask he wore, and then it resonated, seemed louder, closer than it actually was. Sometimes low, sometimes rumbling, trying to hide the inner strength that couldn't be contained. The priest was walking behind Leda and scared her inadvertently. Was he talking to me? What does he want? She quickened her pace, but then forced herself to slow down. She was struggling to breathe. There was a leaden weight on her chest. Breathe. Slowly. Don't rush. His advice sounded like orders. She was scared to disobey. She grew worried when she realized he was talking to her after all. She didn't dare to turn around. She walked forward as if she hadn't heard his instructions. Her ears were ringing, the trees were spinning, and the path was winding. Something that Leda, as holding back, was trying to burst out. She remembered Tata's trembling chin, her reluctance to cry in front of everyone. Would Leda feel better if she cried too? But she couldn't. She just couldn't. Do as I say. No. She dared to whisper, but she couldn't tell why she was being stubborn. Her legs got tangled. By some miracle, she managed to stay on her feet again, or did someone help her? Whose hand was that? You're walking like you're drunk. You're going to faint. What's wrong with me? Oh gods, I spoke to him. Many people feel sick in the forest. It torments the weak. I'm not weak. Then breathe. The priest didn't try to catch up to her. He slowed down when she slowed down, but didn't quicken his pace if she took a few hurried steps, trying to put more distance between them. Alright. That's the sound advice. I'm being stupid. She did as the priest ordered. Slowly. Don't rush. With each new breath, she was feeling less dizzy. The trembling began to subside. Her wobbly legs felt steady again. The ground felt solid, and the path was straight. It passed. She bit her lip, fighting back the urge to speak to the priest again, but couldn't resist and said softly, Thank you. I feel better. He didn't say anything. Without his voice, which had been guiding them through the mirages of the forest, it suddenly felt empty and lonely. Maybe he didn't hear me? She turned around slowly. He was closer than she thought. The priest was looking ahead, but when he noticed that she was staring at him, he lowered his head, catching her surprised look. She turned away bashfully. Damn it! She tried to walk fast enough as not to bump into the priest. She didn't turn around anymore. The priest helped calm you down. On return from the funeral, everyone looked into the mouth of the stove or into an empty trough, so that neither Vereya nor the dead people who may have accidentally followed them would stay there. Plunging her head into the dough-mixing tub, Lada whispered, No, you're not here. Her words dissolved and collapsed, swallowed up by emptiness. The ritual they performed every time someone died seemed pointless to her now. It won't help. When all the other rituals were over, they sat down at the table. No one was crying anymore, and some even smiled. Vereya would live forever, together with the gods. They would meet her again when Mara took them with her. The elder raised his mug. Mara is the goddess of death and winter cold. Vereya is dancing and singing on the other side now, just the way she likes. Let's not upset her with our tears. Let the Trimsna begin. Men and women started eating and drinking, spilling mead and wine on the table. Lotta didn't touch her food, but she drank the mead. She kept thinking that from then on, she would have to live without Vereya. She'd wake up, fall asleep without the sound of her breathing. She'd sit at the dinner table next to the silent Hannah without waiting for the loud conversations and empty chatter. Why aren't you eating? Leda was caught up in herself that she completely forgot about her friend. Had he attended the funeral? She didn't really care. I have no appetite. Vereya loved eating it. Trinsnus. Pay your respects. Eat something. Kutya and wine. Meat with vegetables and mead. Kissel. Milk and rye bread. So I don't know what kutya is. This one's a given. Kissel. It makes me want to Google. Alright, so kissel is a simple dish with consistency of a thick gel, kind of like jello. But it is made of grains, oatmeal, rye, wheat, peas, sweet fruit, berries. Kutya is a sweet wheat berry pudding. Listen, not just will you get great voiceovers and also narrating, but also fun facts. Why not? I'm gonna go with something a little heavy. Lotta took some meat with mushrooms and vegetables. She washed it down with the meat, feeling her shoulders relax and her head growing lighter. She really felt better. Tana walked around the table and sat down next to her. She didn't seem to notice Milan sitting next to Leda or anyone else around her. The priests stood a little apart, not sitting down with the others. When sending a soul on its journey, they had to make sure no evil spirits would come back from the other side. But everyone knew that all evil spirits were lurking beyond the fog. Milan leaned over and whispered, "They give me the creeps. They protect us. They perform sacrifices to empower the gods. If the gods fade away, the Haze will take us." He sighed. "I know, but they scare me." Ozar turned to the priests and asked quietly so that no one would hear, "Do you feel it?" "Yes." "One of you. Check it out." "All right." The young priest stepped back quietly as if he weren't touching the floor and walked past the people. His cloak flapped behind him and the bull's skull towered over everyone's heads. Leda watched him, spellbound, and shivered when the figure disappeared from view. Where did he go? I don't know. Priests don't mourn for the souls. He squeezed her hand and smiled reassuringly. "Well, you're holding up well." Leda gently pulled her fingers away and hid her hands beneath the table. She wanted to be strong, but the pity of others put all her defenses at risk of crumbling down. The high priest waited until the table was partially empty and then got up and sang, "It's time to tell fortunes about life and death of the rest of the family." "Oh, quickly run." Her serious and almost peculiar voice sounded ominous. The high priestess was also feared. She didn't hide her face behind a mask and communicated more often with the villagers, and therefore they were a little more used to her gift. And yet, she inevitably scared ordinary people. They depended on those who managed to tame the evil spirits. The priests could save them, or if they wished, they could throw them into the clutches of the supernatural forces. Leda shifted in her seat when the priestess began to crumple a paper. "Don't worry. It's my least favorite part. Why do we need to know what will happen in the future? One death is enough. Fortune-telling usually ends well. You'll feel better. Rest assured." "If you knew what was in my heart, you wouldn't be saying that, Milan." The priestess turned the sheet into a shapeless lump, put it in the bottom of an overturned plate, and stretched out her hand silently, demanding for something to be given to her. Siana handed the priestess a lit candle. The priestess touched the paper with the tip of the flame, and it instantly caught fire. The villagers fell silent, watching her actions intently. Lada exchanged glances with her father. My parents are worried, too. The priestess picked up the plate and began to turn it slowly. Trying not to disrupt the shape of the ashes, she put it against the wall. Everyone held their breaths. The priestess carefully turned the edges of the plate to one side and then to the other until a shadow cast by the candle flame appeared on the wall. The shadow, small at first, suddenly grew unnaturally and menacingly. The priestess's voice thundered like a judgment. A dead animal among the trees. Lada felt a chill piercing her spine, digging its claws into her neck and not letting her turn away. It's hard to imagine a worse prediction. I don't understand. Her mother dropped the cutlery she was holding. She then jumped up from the table and began picking it up, apologizing in a strangled voice. Deviations can be interpreted in many different ways. The High Priestess returned to the table, exchanged glances with Ozar, and said with a strained smile, Fate has several paths, that's right. The elder turned to the grieving, frightened parents and said, Don't worry. Not today. Let Vereya leave quietly. You're right. We can handle it. I'm fine. Everyone resumed the meal, forgetting about the deviation. Lada grabbed a spoon and looked down at her plate. She didn't pay attention to how hard she was squeezing it. The wood cracked in her fingers. Malone was afraid to even talk to her. She looked wild and lonely. Her father, the elder, and the High Priestess got up from the table and stepped to the side. Finally, Malone made up his mind and said casually, In fact, the predictions often don't come true. There was a case. Hush. Lada was listening to the conversation. There's nothing on Vereya's body. Besides, she was found so close to the Haze during the vernal equinox when the gap opens. Let's not jump to conclusions. Sometimes humans are worse than evil spirits. But if it's Nav's fault, then what? We'll find out who did this to your daughter, Ratmere. Nav is a place where dark forces dwell. She was murdered. Lada turned to Tata. She was completely forgotten that she was sitting beside her. We don't know that for sure. Evil spirits would have taken her in the Haze and not left her lying there. Tata, stop it. You know it too. It's easier for you to think that was an evil spirit rather than thinking that there's a murderer among us. Shut up. They won't look for the one responsible. Vereya will remain restless and won't be able to leave. She'll suffer and... Shut up. A lot of silent stares. Thanks, Tata, thanks. Tata shuddered and quieted down, but Lada had already attracted too much attention. They both lowered their eyes. Please don't say that. She spoke calmly now, almost a whisper. Vereya is dead. She went... We sent her off. She's not here. I don't believe it. She's never coming back. Lada. It doesn't matter who killed her, even if the Haze killed her, even if someone killed her. I mean, it's true. It's not like she's coming back regardless, so, even if someone killed her, she's not coming back. Lada knew that she was hurting herself as well as Tata, but she also knew that she needed to chase away those hopes before they could take root. Being afraid and hoping that Vereya had stayed was too cruel to the wounded soul of the one who was gone. The truth was, sometimes people died, and the living had to let them go. Lada took Tata's hand. She squeezed her fingers, noting how small and cold they were. She smiled, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. She was sad, dejected. Her hand lay limp, out of the politeness rather than anything else. Lada let her go and looked away. Why did I do that? I won't be able to replace Vereya. Tadia didn't try to become my friend before. She didn't want to do that now. Not that I need it. I just wanted to. I don't know. I won't think about it. Tadia sat still for a while. She wasn't looking at Lada. Didn't know what thoughts were swarming in her head, but then she raised her eyes and looked at Lada's profile. She had changed. Not much. She was barely noticeable, subtle, but it was as if something had snapped inside of her. Coldness had burst out the tip of cracked piece that had been languishing inside of her for many years, and now was no longer holding her up. She was strong, resilient, but it depended on her whether she could resist or break down under the weight of that grief. Tadia, gentle, accommodating, if not awkward outwardly, then deep in her heart reached for her support. She took Lada's hand hesitantly, her eyes asking for permission, and whispered, "I'm sorry. And thank you." "It's all right." The faces were turned towards each other, knees touching, fingers sharing warmth. For a moment, they both believed that there would be solid ground under their feet again, and the turmoil in their souls would quiet down. But then they realized how close they were sitting, heard the hum of voices around them, and snapped back to reality. Almost simultaneously, they withdrew their hands and sat straighter. They felt awkward, even though they hadn't done anything. The memories of the past poisoned the little comfort they had found. "We're not friends." Lada was Vereya's sister, and Tadia was Vereya's friend. They had nothing in common, and what happened now was nothing more than hypocrisy. They didn't want to lie to themselves. They didn't want to be friends, and that was the only thing that they had in common. You cannot replace a person with someone else. You have to let go, not cling to each other seeking support. Those thoughts flashed through their minds. Lada grieved for a family member. Tadia lamented her loneliness. Each of them thought she was one who was hurting more. Lada rose from the table. "I'll go out, get some fresh air. I can't breathe because of the candles." Tadia smiled again, the corners of her mouth forced curling up. "I shouldn't be so foolish to try and make friends with her. I don't want to look pathetic." "Still, it made you both feel better." "Oh, how many? Throw him this." I don't understand, why not be friends? I don't understand. Milan coughed into his fist. "How do you like the meat? It was a bit undercooked last time." Tadia grimaced, but quickly switched back to her former politeness. "It is better this time." Vlas leaned over to Degran and poured some mead into his mug. "Red mead, the best kind." "Stop frowning, be a man, have a drink." Degran didn't reply, watching Lada's retreating figure. He, for 63 diamonds, decided to follow her. "Help me, please." Degran got up. "Where are you going?" "I'll be right back." Vlas spilled his mead and cursed under his breath. "Where did he go?" "Dragan? Who knows? He's probably following Vereya's sister. I don't remember her name." "Lada." "Right." Ozar looked thoughtfully at the door that had closed behind Dragan. Lada hugged herself, shivering from the frosty air. She kept replaying the events of the day, trying to shake away all of her emotions. If she looked into the rippled reflections of her feelings even for a moment, she would have drowned for sure, and no one would have saved her. My birthmark has changed. Something happened with Vereya's death. There's no point in being afraid yet. I need to figure out what this is all about. A bad omen doesn't always mean death. What if it's a promise of change? Lada turned around at the creaking of the door behind her. Dragan froze, realizing that he had already been noticed. He reluctantly let go of the handle and took a few steps towards her. "Why is he here?" She quickly turned away so he wouldn't notice her confusion. She expected to see anyone but Dragan. What does he want? Dragan was coming closer and closer, slowly, reluctantly. Lada was wondering when he would stop, or maybe if she got lucky, he would just walk past her. Finally, his footsteps stopped just a few feet away from her. Lada was still standing with her arms wrapped around herself, but decided she would look too dejected, so she straightened up and dropped her arms. Pausing for a moment to collect her thoughts, she turned to him. He staggered back, not expecting her to turn around. She was wearing her scarf. Thank you. He didn't say her name, but he didn't need to. Of course. Oh, okay. Vereya will feel no worse among the gods than she did here. He mumbled it awkwardly, forcing the words out as if he were reciting lines he had memorized. There was a pause. Lada was trying hard to avoid his eyes, and he was doing the exact opposite. I'll visit you less often from now on. Lada couldn't contain a grin, surprising herself. You didn't have to tell me. Why? Because Vereya wouldn't be there anymore. You and I were never close. You'd better tell my father, he'll be upset. Dragan smirked and took a step back, about to leave. You're right. So used talking to you. Yes, so can you please leave me alone? It came out rudely. It had been a while since Lada dared to speak so sharply. He pretends to care about my feelings again, but he's doing it just for show, so as not to upset the others. Bro, you're alone out here. What are you talking about? I can't stand that kind of pretense right now. Your sister died. I just wanted to show my support. But that doesn't please you either. I didn't ask you to. There's no need to feel sorry for me. I don't. I have no doubt about that. He turned away from her and even took a few steps towards the house, but a spurt of irritation turned him back. What's wrong with you? She flinched at his tone, but responded in an equally irritated manner. My father isn't here. Vereya isn't either. Leave me alone. What does that have to do with them? You don't have to pretend you hate me. Come on, tell me it's not true. Their voices, loud and angry at the moment before, suddenly went quiet as the conversation turned into a fragile path they hadn't dared to set foot on before. He paused, then said, through gritted teeth as if deliberately emphasizing a hidden lie, It's not true. Really? Hate is too strong a word. If you're so annoyed by my attention, I suppose you're right. I won't pretend to enjoy your company. What did I do to you? Nothing. You overestimate your importance in my life. I respect your father, you're his daughter, that's all. I told you what I had to tell you. Let's pretend that you accepted my condolences. Let's leave it at that. Dragan turned to leave, but Lada's question forced him to stop. Why did you give me the pendant? He turned his head, but not enough for her to decipher his emotions. Why do you want to know? Tell me. He looked at her steadily, defiantly. Do you want me to tell you the truth or a lie? I wanted to make you happy. I want the truth. Do you want to make this day even worse? You overestimate the importance of your gift. Then why are you so interested? Just tell me. Vereya asked me. I received it in exchange for a weapon. Seemed ashamed to throw it away. Is that what you wanted to hear? Dragan came very close to her. Lada threw her head back, fighting back tears as best as she could. Are you happy now? Did I meet your expectations? You exceeded them. He turned on his heel and went back inside. You can't stand each other and you always find a reason to argue. Why? I too would like to know the question for that. I don't understand. Tears poured from her eyes. She couldn't hold back anymore. I'm so foolish and naive. Why did I pry the truth out of him? I knew what he would say. What did I care why he gave me the damn pendant? Because you're a dum-dum. Dragan burst furiously into the room, crossed the hall in a few steps, and sat down at the table. He snatched the mug from Loss's hands and drank down the mead. Hey, is everything all right? Everything's great. Puppets. Lana calmed down enough to not betray her emotions. Once again, she checked that her cheeks were dry, hurried back even though she didn't want to return to the place of sorrow. Lana ducked into the narrow crack and closed the door quietly, slipping past the crowd to sit down unnoticed. She hated the idea of meeting someone's eyes, seeing sympathy or strained smile, talking about how lucky Vereya was to be dead. After all, they always said the same thing, it's better among the gods. Lana agreed with it, but it didn't make her feel any better. Lana stubbornly avoided looking at the table where Dragan was sitting. She decided to pretend that he wasn't there. It was easier that way. But her whole body itched and burned at the thought he could be looking at her, even though she knew that he was probably avoiding her just the same. But he was better at pretending that she didn't exist. Unexpectedly, another guest joined the Trisna. Vereya slipped quietly into the room, but it took only a few moments for everyone present to notice her. She was petite, her every movement graceful, cautious, but as soon as she appeared, the space seemed to shrink, leaving no chance to look away from her. Okay. Society had rejected her. Even Dragan, her son, couldn't hide his furious trembling on the rare occasions she allowed herself to return from her self-imposed seclusion, barging into their lives so brazenly. The elder involuntarily stood up when he saw his ex-wife. Vereya bowed her head, closed her eyes, and said softly, "Elder, I came to see the parents of the deceased." Vereya's parents rose from the table. She stretched out her arms towards them, and, as they approached her, whispered something to them. Dragan observed the scene with pursed lips, and Milan whispered, "What is she doing here? She's out of her mind. She's the type to love such occasions." "This is the first time I've heard you speak ill of someone. And why is she out of her mind?" "Only an insane person would give up everything and run away to the outskirts to live alone." "Yes, I'm insane then. Woohoo!" "You would never do that, right?" "What?" Lana lowered her eyes. "Oh, nothing." Vereya left. The elder watched her go thoughtfully. Lana exchanged glances with her mother, but she shook her head. "Nothing important." Apparently, the hermit had decided to go support them, and that was all. The Trisna ended soon after. Everyone went home. They walked back in complete silence. Anna trudged warily behind, and her mother had to constantly look around and rush her. It's hard to tell what Hannah understands and what she doesn't. Does she realize that her sister is dead? Maybe she feels everything, but can't express her pain. Lana felt awkward around her parents, as if she were to blame for what had happened. Was she supposed to take Vereya's place now? Did she need to change? To fill the void left in her heart? I will help them cope with loss, I agree with, or I don't have to become her to help. I agree with both of those. I'll go with help them cope. Her mother suddenly stopped in front of the house. She raised her head, looked at the window as if she was expecting to see Vereya sitting on the windowsill waiting for their return, but the window was shut tight. Only darkness awaited in the room. "Come on." The man gave her a gentle nudge forward. Lana remained still. suddenly petrified by an alarming thought. Going to sleep all alone. She clenched her fists and took a deep breath. That's enough. Stop thinking about it. I have to get used to it. This is how life is now, and it will never be any other way. She jumped the steps of the porch and entered the house. The stairs creaked and groaned underfoot, reluctantly accepting the weight of the treaded feet. The house was dark, cold, and nauseatingly quiet. Lotta hesitated in the doorway, standing with her shoulder braced against the door frame. Her eyes roamed over the things that Vereya had once touched. Why is a doll on the bed? Images of her bubbly sister flashed in her memory, the timbre of her voice and her chattering, the meaning of which had long flowed down the river of fire. Lotta said goodbye to all that in her order to wake up in the morning without her feeling pity for Vereya and for herself. Lotta was going to move on. But then her sister's bed caught her eye and her heart jumped into her throat. Uh-huh. You notice it too, do you? Except why are the arms on the doll different now? Vereya's doll, the one that was supposed to be in the casket behind the boarded-up door of the hut. It was on the bed staring at Lad, with its smooth face, without eyes, without ears, and without a mouth. Yay. I give you 5. So, we gained 1 haze, 2 reality, 3 tie, 0 determination, 4 compassion. And let's get them diamonds. Alright, so it looks like episode 3 is available currently, so I will get to work on that as soon as possible. Without further ado, if you did enjoy the content that I do, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Head down the description, plenty of things to check out, ways to support, and whatnot. There's also the join and thanks feature that's on the channel. Aside from that, so yeah, I was actually having a discussion with someone very recently about their beliefs, and they talked about the pantheon and whatnot, and it's actually something that's very foreign to me. So it's interesting to kind of learn things. I always love to continue learning like new things and experiences and whatnot. So it's kind of a new thing. It's kind of like, you know, there's Viking lore and there's, you know, normal religions like Catholic, Christian, Judaism, yada yada, right? It's always nice to learn new things, even though I'm not a person that would consider myself, you know, how can I say, practicing one or more. I just like to educate myself and know, right? Keep an open mind. And also my knowledge and want to learn goes beyond such things as well. But it's nice to learn something like that in this book and little tidbits and clues and whatnot, especially when you pick diamond choices and whatnot. Nice to learn things. Let me know what you guys believe in the comments section. You know, what you feel about this, or what you guys believe, or who, you know, I always love to hear your feedback. Aside from that, I'm just going to leave a little note here for you guys. Especially for you, like, RC players, right? I don't know if you guys are aware of what's going on, and I don't know if I should make a separate, tiny little video in regards to this or whatnot, but, you know, I don't understand, a lot of the giving the devs problems lately. I really don't. I really don't. If you know, you know. If you don't, let me know in the comment section below so I can explain it to you. But I'm just going to say this. This is all fictional, right? Clearly, the Haze, there's not a village somewhere on Earth right now, right? And there's people not like this. Correct me if I'm wrong. So, why do people care so much about fictional characters that don't really exist, that they're supposed to represent them, that could end up being good or bad, and basically you don't know how they're going to be, especially on one episode? So there's people right now giving the RC devs some stuff and some, you know, negative stuff, and I don't understand you. And I would like to tear you limb from limb. No, I'm being serious though. I don't understand you. If you want representation, right? And I know some of you do, and don't get me wrong, there's quite a lot about that, right? Again, I feel like I should make a completely different video on this, but I just wanted to include this. The devs are doing nothing wrong, right? They're just making books or uploading books that are already made, or doing things that are already established and for some of this, and then other things aren't. Um, and you know, I never saw this happen with other apps, and I'm seeing just a metric ton with this app. Like the devs up until like a month ago were literally and figuratively like leaning heavily on one side, and now that they've tried to approach the other side and kind of like have a middle ground, a gray ground, you guys have done nothing but make their lives living hell, and I don't understand that. So, but that's my 411. That's my input. That's my opinion. Like I said, if you want to know more, I feel like I should do a video because I'm probably the only content creator who, let's be honest, I already am the only content creator who reads this stuff, let alone comments, does voices, and uploads this stuff. But also, you know, the only one who doesn't do the tap, 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 tap. And then I'm also a person who, you know, has a community and appreciates every single one of you, and then also appreciates every single one of your comments and your voices, and you know, even when we agree to disagree sometimes. But you know, again, I don't understand, and maybe, like I said, let me know if I should do something, because I feel like I should. Because I'd be the only content creator who would do that too. And this isn't, you know, making content to make content. This is something that is actually an issue that kind of is bothering me right now. And it's listen, I don't get paid to do RC, I don't get paid to do choices, I don't get paid to do any of the shit I do. Like I'm not that big of a content creator, okay? I pretty much do this shit just to give you guys content. But aside from that, I'm gonna stop ranting now. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Otherwise, thank you for watching. Catch you all later. Peace out.